good thing that you waited, because today we've got probably one of the most exciting persons ever in our studio today. We have astronaut Charlie Camarda, and we're so excited to have him. I'm going to tell you a little bit about his background. But before we get started on Charlie, let's remember that if you like our content, you got to subscribe, you got to hit the bell, you got to hit the like button, and please give us comments. You can make comments, and I'll forward them along to Charlie. If you have questions for him, he'll try to respond to you. But remember the rules of the Terraverse TV station: respect, disagree if you want to, but be respectful. If not, something will come out of space and land on your house. Who knows? A piece of ice might fall off of a plane. But anyway, no, it's going to have good fun. Let's get started. I'm going to introduce Charlie. You probably may have heard of him if you're old enough, like I am. I watched some of his missions, and I remember them. They were when we were in school. They used to bring the TVs out, Charlie, and they used to let us watch all the launches, and it was like the biggest thing ever. I mean, space was everything when we were growing up.
John, I'm not an Apollo-ish. You know that, right?
No, I get that.
Okay.
You're not that old. But we watched the shuttle, goddammit. I'm not saying. No, I do. Remember, we did watch that too, but that was in the 70s,
okay.
Right?
Yes, I am older than you.
And we definitely looked at those. It was a big deal. I remember my life, that was always a big deal. We loved space, and we were loving that our astronauts, and when the shuttles started, that was like unbelievable. And so it was exciting. So anyway, let me just tell you about Charlie, then I'm going to get into his background, his life, and some of the missions that he's on, and his new book. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So Charlie was born in Queens, New York. He's a local hero for us New Yorkers. He's an American engineer. He's a NASA astronaut. He flew his first mission into space aboard the space shuttle STS-114. We're going to talk about that. That was an amazing flight. And
you got to watch the movie.
I got to watch the movie with his flight commander, and she's an amazing person, Eileen Collins, right? So we met her, and we talked about that mission, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. He's also a senior advisor for engineering development at NASA at Langley Research Center. He's a senior advisor for innovation at the office of the chief engineer at the Johnson Space Center. He is a academic as well as an author. He was also, quite an athlete back in the high school days. We'll talk a little bit about that. He comes from, a blue-collar background like myself, and, here's a guy, comes right from Queens and made it to the top of the top in the engineering and astronaut world. It's an amazing story, and we should all be proud of him. He's married. He's got a daughter, right, and a grandson and a granddaughter, right?
His 6 grandkids.
Okay.
And 2 stepdaughters, a daughter.
Okay. Some of this is dated. I pull my research at the last minute, but don't worry, Charlie's going to fill us in. So let's start with Charlie. You grew up in Queens, okay? I grew up in Derby. We know what those towns are like, okay? And what could have possibly, in your early days, could have directed you to the career that you ultimately ended up in?
Well, I'm older than you, John, right?
I don't believe that, but people, you guys, you make your own judgment.
I'm older than you, and so my heroes were the Mercury 7 astronauts. Those 7 men in those silver suits climbing on board, and it was Cold War, us against the Russians, and my father had a little neighborhood butcher shop in Queens, New York, and it was all talk politics, Russians, the evil empire. It wasn't called the evil empire back then, but it was us against the Russians technically. We didn't fight a war, but it meant everything, and those were my heroes. What led me to becoming it.
But what possessed you to think that you could even? I remember growing up in my town. I didn't even think I could go to college. No one did. You just say, who are we, right, Charlie?
I had to have something wrong with me when I was a kid. I might have been a little bit on the spectrum. Maybe, I don't know. But I was always talking. I would always talk to people older than me. I always respected people older than me. They would guide me, and I always loved science. And a good friend of mine is Homer Hickam, and so I always tell Homer that when he was building rockets in Coalwood, West Virginia, little Charlie Camarda was going to the neighborhood pharmacy and getting the chemicals to build rockets and other things in the basement of my house.
So you were like fireworks too. I like fireworks.
Yes.
Charlie and I share the fireworks thing.
We don't want to say bombs. We don't want to say fireworks. Pyrotechnics.
Pyrotechnics. We do share that. We love things that go boom and put lights out. So when you were in high school, I'm going to go all the way back to when you're in high school. Did you think about going into engineering at that point, or when was it that you got the engineering?
Absolutely. Ever since I was a kid, I was always into that. But it was when I was in high school, I went to Archbishop Malloy, and they our teachers had us take tests to see what are you most adapted for, what would you do well in, and I always knew I wanted to be an engineer. But when I took the test, they said you're going to be a chemical engineer, an aerospace engineer, and so I had kids in the neighborhood that were going to Brooklyn Polytech and into engineering. I had an uncle that worked on the lunar module, the LEM out at Grumman Aerospace. And so I had these three uncles that worked in the aerospace industry. And that's what led me down that path to become an engineer. And that's why I went to Brooklyn Polytech and took aerospace engineering.
So that's good. So you actually had some people in your family that you could look up to. And I remember, like, for me, in my own life, it wasn't for the older men that I worked with. They taught me everything.
Yeah.
And it was a great, I wish today that more older guys would get more involved in young guys' lives. I think they would change a lot of what's going on out there. You would never have the crime. You wouldn't. I mean, Charlie, if you did something bad, you're going to get not just your father, but every older man in your life.
The whole neighborhood.
He's going to
take
an issue with that because you embarrass the whole neighborhood, right? It's just not going to happen.
That's exactly right. And I didn't understand the value of mentorship. I joined a group of people in New York. Debbie Heiser runs the Mentorship Project, and I realized that the people that guided me, that mentored me when I was a young engineer at NASA, how important that was. And the culture we had, which I call a research culture, was knowledge was everything and learning was everything, and using the scientific method to do that. And we were taught how to be researchers by these amazing people. And the thing that made me, I always wanted to work for NASA, but the thing that did it for me was I did an internship between my junior and senior years at Brooklyn Poly, and I was at NASA Langley, and I had these geniuses working with me, answering my questions, and I said, "Wow, this is what I want to do. I want to be a researcher." And it takes years to do that, to mentor people to do that, like in your profession.
Yeah. No, and I get that, and so like I said, for people who think that the boomers are no longer useful, they probably might want to call us back to do a little bit of mentoring. and then I've been encouraging my cohort to do that, because everything I am today came from older men in my life that taught me how to be a man, how to respect people, how to respect women, and all these things. I mean, I didn't think twice about it because that was the way it was.
I always gravitated to the older people, my grandparents. I would be a little kid, not even able to go to school yet. I was like 4 or 5. I'd be walking down the block and sitting on the stoop with some older guys and just talking to them.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I remember, and this is something that I think we should actually try to transfer, they didn't treat us like kids.
No.
You were expected to be held to the same standard as an adult, and they talked to you like an adult as long as you were respectful. You get out of hand, they're going to straighten you out.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up probably similar to me. We respected our elders, our seniors, and that was very important. And hopefully, I'm transferring that to my grandkids.
No, I'm working on it too, because I worry about it. My son, he's wonderful, thank God. He's completely gets it. I think because growing up around me, my brothers, and my older brother, he saw how we act, and he's been a great son. He's never gotten any trouble, and God bless. I did far worse than him.
And it's also the family, right? Yeah. Back then, the families were very close. Immigrant families. I'm second generation Italian immigrants, all from Italy. And we had lots of cousins, and we had lots of people around, and it was always faith, family, and friends, and the values that went along with that.
And the other thing that came up, as I think back, I'm always trying to figure out, how do I help, younger people? And because I had a big family, and you had, like you said, the neighborhood took care of you. Like, old Hillary used to have this thing about, takes a community. She's right. And it does. And I remember if you were even a couple of years older, you were responsible for all the kids under you. So when you were out,
Yeah.
we didn't have babysitters. We didn't have,
Yeah.
whoever was the oldest, they were responsible.
I had an older brother.
Yeah.
Did you have an older
I
sibling?
had two. And one of them put my head through a window, the other one put my head through a wall.
Yeah. And we fought like cats and dogs, but he always had my back.
Oh, of course. But I'm just saying, but you were responsible. My parents were never there. We were out with the kids. Whoever was the oldest was in charge, and that was it. And so you had responsibility as a kid.
Yeah.
For the younger kids and everybody in the neighborhood. Whoever's mother happened to be out there, she was in charge. It didn't matter whose mother it was.
Yeah.
She had full authority to discipline everyone.
That's right. And if you were bad, you got it when you went home.
So when you went to college, Charlie, and so that it took off, you went to what, George Washington, right? And then also Virginia Polytech, right?
That's right.
Okay,
That's right.
so you got your doctorate.
So the great thing, the reason why it was so great working for NASA, because back then it was a research center, and they encouraged you to get advanced degrees, and they paid for everything.
Oh, okay.
And
Like
so
the military could do. They don't. They used to not do, but they do now.
This was unbelievable. I could work at NASA Langley in my office and take a class in Virginia with teachers that were from George Washington. And the other thing was the brilliant minds at NASA Langley would teach courses. And so what you were learning was the math, you were learning the science, the physics of the problem, but it was applied to problems you were solving at work. And it was very impactful.
So where did you, when you started to specialize, because I know you've got quite a vita of all of the areas. So was it chemical engineering? Did you go, where
I went straight into aerospace engineering, and it's an interesting story. When I first got hired at NASA, I said I would do anything, right? But when I did my internship, I really loved what I was doing with these people in structural mechanics and optimization. But when I got there and they made me go to the instrument research division, working on structures that were about this big, like little models that were going to be in wind tunnels, I said, I really don't want to do this. I want to go back to the people I was working with. Otherwise, I just want to go home. I don't want to work at NASA anymore. And they let me go to every division and spend time with every division chief. And the person, instead of going to structural mechanics where my mentor was, my original mentor, the person excited me and got me motivated to go into hypersonic structures. The things that are a challenge that was impossible. Planes and spacecraft flying 25 times the speed of sound. They heat up. They have all these combined loads. And you have to design something to survive that. And so I said, wow. And so I was always driven to the almost impossible kind of challenges. And I loved it. I loved it.
If it wasn't for the space program, right, this technology, so many things that we actually have, right, in our everyday life came out of the space science, right?
I mean, exactly. NASA does a good job, but I think they could do a better job because they have to explain to the public and sell to the public the technology that they're developing is looking at technology in space, but it's being used on Earth. We're advancing the state of technology because when you think about it, you talk about in situ resource utilization, to live off the land, to live on Mars, to live on the moon, to live on a space station. You have to recycle everything. So the technology you're doing transfers back on Earth to save the planet, And so I developed a course called the Epic Challenge Program in a pedagogy to inspire kids to go to learn and not drop out of the STEM subjects by giving them these outrageous challenges that all kids love to do, but then teaching them how to solve it, giving them the courses, giving them the connection with the experts. And the kids loved it. I got to experiment with it when I came back on detail after I flew in space. My boss let me come back here at work at NYU, what's now Tandon School of Engineering. I got to work with high school kids from New York, New Jersey, 88 different schools. They would come to the campus in the summertime, and we would solve, like, how do you design a spacesuit for Mars? And the kids loved it.
And that's like, and I think back at my own school. I loved engineering, so I went that way. When I was in the Air Force, I was with an engineering team, but we were more focused on the ground and building stuff.
Yeah.
and
Yeah, yeah.
infrastructure.
Civil.
And I loved it. Yeah, more civil
Civil
and mechanical engineering. Wasn't. We didn't do any aeronautics, although the Air Force has plenty of that, but that's not what we were doing. And I loved it because you could always see the fruits of your labor, right? You build stuff, and there it is, right?
When you think about it, I worked on an amazing program called the National Aerospace Plane. I don't know if you remember it, but Ronald Reagan, we're going to fly an airplane from here to Tokyo in 2 hours.
Oh, yeah, I do remember that.
Hypersonically. Remember that? And so we teamed up with the Air Force. So Langley and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, DARPA, it was a classified kind of program, but it was all hypersonic vehicle design. And when you think about it, the reason why we have composite structures in airplanes today was because of that fundamental research that people at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and NASA Langley Research Center conducted. You know, Burt Rutan wouldn't know what a composite was if it wasn't for the government investing in real applied research back then. And we're losing it. And if we lose that, and we've lost it at NASA right now, I believe it's going to affect our country. Right now, when we were working the NAS program, we were further along than the Chinese and the Russians. Right now, we're struggling to catch up, and this is a critical technology. And they're graduating hundreds more PhDs than we are going into these fields. And that's what I worry about.
I want to touch on that because that's exactly an issue I've concerned with. So when I was in the military, and I worked with all the best guys, they were all engineers. Okay, they were amazing, brilliant, super hardworking. And when I told them I was getting out, because I hurt my knee and I was off combat status, I'd already done 6 years. I decided, okay, I'm going to go. I hadn't gone to college yet, so I'm going to go be an engineer like you guys, And believe it or not, they all said, "What are you, crazy, John?" He goes, "You're not going to make enough money doing an engineering." He said,
You did the right thing.
No,
I didn't have the mentor to tell me
I swear to
that.
God, I was like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "John, you have no idea what we do and what we get paid." He goes, "Go to Wall Street, go to business school." And sure enough, I thought about it. I said, I was 33 years old. I said, I wanted to make money for my family. And I took him up on it, and I decided to go to business school, but this is a long story. I told other people I ended up going to law school instead. And now when I come out, I look at what lawyers make and the guys on Wall Street. And then I look around when we have PhDs all day long for $150,000. And I pay a paralegal more than that. It's embarrassing,
I know.
Charlie. It's embarrassing.
I know. There's a disparity there. And we need kids going into those fields because that's what keeps the economy going, really. I mean, when we look at, I call it the Apollo effect. I mean, drawing kids into those fields back in those days, you saw the curves go up in PhDs and master's degrees. And it also, you look at the patents and the economy went up with that. And we need to do that. I mean, we need all these disciplines, but obviously you don't make a ton of money.
But if we make
engineer.
if we make it sexy enough again, and also, I think you want to teach kids entrepreneurship so that they understand if you're good, you can maybe do a startup, you get your own company, you can get a piece of the pie, because the kids in Silicon Valley, that's what they did. But they were not doing so much with engineering, right? So what do you think?
And you want to know something? If money is your object, yeah.
It's not just money, but these guys need to get, so they will go into it, right? Because that's what they're thinking,
the thing that drove me to research and NASA, because I could have made more money in industry, was because I had so much freedom. And the thing about doing research and engineering, when you have that freedom and you're not directed by the program, you got to work on this widget and it's got to do this, and you could do whatever your mind, whatever you can come up with, and you could sell your boss that this is a great idea, and you can explore and have fun. You work on the right side of your brain, and it creates that, being that creative part of your brain gives you that sense of joy. I was never happier than when I was working at NASA Langley with only 15 people working for me in the thermal structures branch. And when my boss, after I flew in space, and the administrator of NASA, before I flew, he says, "I want you to be the director of engineering at Johnson Space Flight Center. I want you to change the culture there." And I said, "I really don't want to do that. I want to go back and be a researcher. I want to go." He said, "But no, I want you to do this." And I said, I knew how hard it was going to be to change the culture because I knew how bad the culture was broken. And I told him, I said, "Listen, I'll go in the ring with one hand tied behind my back. but don't tie both hands behind my back
And your legs.
and then put me in there for to fight this fight because it was a worthy fight to fight. And he didn't have my back. I mean, you read the book, you know the story. When it came time for people to back me up and change the culture, they all folded like a house of cards.
That's the biggest problem with bureaucracies, and we know that from
Exactly.
everywhere we go. So, what you just said was something I think is important. I think I see it a lot. So, where do I see people who stay in career fields that don't make a lot of money, but it's because of the psychic benefit of what they're doing, which is you see that in the military, right?
See it in the medical profession.
Yep.
Nurses, right?
So those kind of people are really impressive to me because it's not the money. They love it, but also there's other areas that are similar like that. People are in politics because they get power,
another
right?
important area that we don't give them the pay that they deserve. Educators, teachers in this country. That's
been an
shameful.
Issue. It is very shameful. And I mean, we've tried and there's been so much talk about it. I think the money never gets to the teachers. Right, like New York, as we know, is the highest. We get the highest per capita spending in New York, and the teachers still don't make much, and we still have the worst outcomes. Where's it going?
So much, exactly right, and this is why we have to get rid of these bureaucracies. I really believe the money doesn't get to the people that deserve it, and earn it, and it doesn't get to people. Even the medical profession is going that way.
Of course, doctors don't make a lot. My brother's doctor, he was going to get out of the business until I turned his practice around.
It's crazy what bureaucracies have done to this.
I agree, and I think part of it is that we have to be willing to fight the incumbent bureaucracy of the management because their overhead.
The nail on the head.
If you were running a business and your overhead was 3 times what it should be, you'd be out of business.
Did you ever read a book? I was just talking to him on the phone. London Business School, Gary Hamel, just wrote a book, Humanocracy. He also wrote a paper, Bureaucracies Must Die.
I saw that.
And I was talking to him because I want to start working with him and a good buddy of mine that was the chief learning officer at Boeing. Because in the second half of this book, we talk about how do you change the culture in an organization, and we could use technology to do it. And what I want to do is work with these sociologists and these other business managers and these organizational behavior experts to see how do we, because in order to change a bureaucracy, you have to look at the entire ecosystem. You just can't tackle a part of it. It's just like changing a culture. You just can't change one manager out. You have to take the whole animal and attack it and do it. And I think we could use technology. And so I was inspired by some of the little bit of work we were doing. I tried to sell it to NASA. They wouldn't listen to me. I tried to show, hey, we could change this toxic culture. And when I saw that they weren't listening anymore in 2019, that's when I retired.
That's
and
crazy.
I figured I'd just write the book. And
we're going to get to the book. I want to talk about one mission before we get to the book. Because I mean, I'm still have goosebumps when we went to see the movie with Eileen, of that mission you were on. We got to talk about that.
A lot of people don't know what went on. Right?
I remember watching that. And I remember that because that was like everyone was terrified you guys are not coming back, right?
Exactly.
So we were watching that like day and night. So
nobody knows how Apollo 13 that was that mission.
Yeah, I know not until I saw it. So again, one thing to keep in mind, we need to get Charlie together with Jordan Peterson because he's putting together the whole disruptive educational system where he's going to teach online.
I would love to.
And he's a psychologist behavior. He's one of the probably smartest guys you're ever going to meet. And you guys should get together. Jen, put that on our list and see if we could reach out to Jordan. I think you'd love him, and he's an amazing guy. And he's trying to do this similar thing.
It's something you have a passion for. When you have a passion for something, it's not work, right?
And he's really also focused on young men because that's a real problem we have. Young men are not stepping up to their roles, and we got to
and so that's why I joined this mentor project, and they're doing a lot of work with kids in the city, and so that's why I enjoyed doing that.
So let's take a minute and go. Let's talk about the mission. Let's talk about that mission. So, right after it was Columbia, right? So people that don't remember, the second crash that we had was Columbia.
Challenger, then Columbia,
and then Columbia was the one where the ice came off of the.
It wasn't ice. It was a large piece of foam during launch. Came off the external tank as you were launching, slammed into the wing. A largest piece of foam that came off the external tank to hit the vehicle. disintegrated into a particle cloud, and and engineers on the ground watched this, and they came up with the answer that it wasn't a problem. Without ever understanding, knowing the physics of the problem, they didn't have the right engineers, they didn't have the right experts. They did not reach out to the people that had the answers at NASA that could have helped them. That's how severely messed up the culture was.
So walk through what happened to Columbia, then let's get into what happened, almost happened again when you went up. So the ultimate effect is it was crashed, but so that
large piece of foam hit the wing leading edge. It could have cracked it. It could have made a hole in it. All you have to do on this wing leading edge is lose a thumbnail-sized piece of a thin coating, and it burns up and you disintegrate when you enter the Earth's atmosphere.
Because you're in a fireball.
You're in a fireball for 15 minutes. Plasma out there about 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Maximum temperatures on the wing leading edge about 3,000 degrees. At 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, the wing leading edge, this particular structure, gets stronger. Right? But if you scratch that coating, if you chip that coating, it disintegrates. And these people got it wrong so bad on the ground, mission control, the engineers on the ground, program managers on the ground, that when they actually simulated the full-scale test with a size piece of foam that hit that wing, it made a pizza box size hole in the wing. And when only one engineer at NASA Johnson Space Flight Center raised his hand and said, I think we should take a picture. And that was Rodney Rocha. And then he got squashed like a bug. And he got vilified, and they beat him down, and he never made another sound. And people didn't listen. People didn't ask critical questions. Right? And so it was completely a psychologically unsafe environment. When you think about it, when you look at the analysis that these engineers used to convince upper managers at NASA that we were okay to fly, I'm telling you, a sophomore in high school would have laughed at the analysis they used. And so how can 1,200 engineers at NASA think that, don't ask the question and say, why is anybody using this analysis? They had been trying for 30 years to come up with analysis to predict if something comes off and impacts, what would it look like? They didn't have a physics-based model. They're doing that same kind of thing right now when they're analyzing the heat shield on Orion.
So Charlie, how could that happen to NASA? Because when we were growing up, you looked at NASA, it's like, failure's not an option. These engineers in there cranking out the numbers, and like just never sleeping. What happened?
They lost touch with their research roots. And so in the first couple of chapters in my book, I call it Boiling a Frog. NASA had this great research culture when it was NACA. They took literally the DNA, 100 people at first to start Johnson Space Center and begin the space program. It was called the Space Task Group. And then it ended up being thousands of people. So these brilliant people that were raised as researchers went to these space centers, right? And then they gradually, over the years, lost touch with their research roots. They weren't raising and mentoring research engineers. These engineers were good engineers, but they were what we call sustaining engineers. They use whatever tools are out there and they apply them to understand problems. The research engineers are basically building those tools. And so, and then it got even worse. They weren't even doing their own separate research to make sure the contractors' numbers were right and their calculations were right. All they were doing was looking over their shoulders. They weren't doing any tests. And so it was ridiculous how that loss of technical excellence just drained out of these centers. And so when it happened, when we got hit with a piece of foam, they didn't even think to call up the people at NASA Langley Glenn Research Center. And so when I came back from Russia, first thing I did was say, you know what, I told my boss, I don't need to be an astronaut, Kent Rominger. I said, I don't need to be an astronaut. I know all these people. I worked for 22 years in this area. Let me go build these teams. We could solve this problem. The people at Johnson Space Center said, because the engineers were beaten down so bad, they said, no, Charlie, we're not going to do that. You can't do that. And the engineers basically told the rest of the teams not to do anything unless the program tells them to do it. Well, I didn't listen to them. I went around the chain of command directly to the people that I knew, the Friends of Charlie Network, at Langley and at Glenn, and they said, yeah, you can have these people, Charlie. They could be on your team. I got a fella from Lockheed that was influencing the CABE. He was a Lockheed vice president or chief engineer he was at that time. And I said, you can't let them do this full-scale test. They were ready to do this full-scale test without doing any analysis to predict what's going to happen and putting just a few gauges on there. They wouldn't have been able to, they wouldn't have learned anything from it. It was a big, dumb, stupid test. And I said, no, let's get the right team to do it. And when they did that, they solved the problem in 3 months that the engineers couldn't solve in 30 years. And that's the difference between making a high-performing team and knowing how to do it and plodding along like they're doing right now, trying to solve these problems. And that's what drives me nuts.
So do you think any of that was attributable to, because I try to always figure out how did it get there, right?
Yeah.
Growth of bureaucracy is one issue. Then, going after the funding. And by the way, you guys were so successful.
Yeah.
Did they get a little bit, full of themselves? I mean, look how many missions you did,
at
right?
NASA, you got, during the Apollo days, money was just pouring into it. The place was growing and it was expanding. They couldn't do it all in-house anymore. And so they lost that technical edge, if you will.
It went from being engineers to bureaucrats, right?
To bureaucrats, and basically just looking over the shoulder and signing documents.
Make sure to get another
following
budget,
rules,
more budget,
processes, and procedures, and not asking critical questions and using their God-given brain to help them solve the problem. It was really frustrating to me because when I was accepted as an astronaut and had to go to Johnson Space Center, I thought this was going to be great. They're going to listen to me. I can help out. I can help design stuff. It'll be great. Nobody even asked me for my technical input. Very, very briefly, and I would sit in the Monday morning meetings and I'm looking at real problems and anomalies with our vehicle that we're flying, and astronauts around me were like getting bored because they were going into technical detail. And I'm like, wow. And they're disrespecting John Young, the consummate engineer and an astronaut who was raising issues, and they would shoot him down and wouldn't respect him. And this guy was bringing up stuff in these areas that were in my area, and I'm saying, how does he know that? And it's because the people trusted John. And so when people weren't speaking up, John Young would fly his T-38 to the Cape. He wouldn't go check in with managers. He'd go on the floor where the engineers were working on the shuttle in the orbiter processing facility, and he'd get from the horse's mouth what was wrong. And they would tell him because they trusted him.
Right.
And they know that he would fix the problem, but they were afraid of telling their own boss. And if you don't have that trust, and that's a psychologically safe environment, if you allow that to happen, and it's difficult to do. But because I spent 18 years researching sociology and behavioral science and reading these papers by these amazing people like Diane Vaughan, Amy Edmondson, Michael Roberto, Carl Weick, it took me that long to understand what they were saying. And so I really believe the managers at NASA, who are left-brain technical people to start with before they become bureaucrats, don't really listen to these people because they think it's a soft science. It's not right. It's not a hard science. But the Columbia accident, Diane Vaughan wrote the book, The Challenger Launch Decision, 10 years of her life. The book is this thick. I read it about at least 3 to 5 times, right? 10 years of her life spending trying to understand that culture. And she came very, very close, closer than anyone, to understand what was going on. Basically said that the problem wasn't the technical, it was the culture. And because of that work, when we had Columbia, Admiral Gaiman, who was running the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, did an amazing job. He pulled her in. He realized how important that was, that you could map from Challenger to Columbia directly the same behaviors that Diane Vaughan, at the end of her book, after Challenger, at the end of her book, she says, NASA will not be able to change its culture. And she predicted that they would have recurring failures. 17 years later, we had Columbia. They brought her in, right? And she does an amazing job, because now the Columbia Accident Investigation Board says the primary cause of the accident was the culture. That's the first time you ever heard that, right? Then you had the Boeing 737 Maxes, and now everybody says it was the culture. And it's very similar. But Diane Vaughan also said after Columbia, they brushed her off. NASA managers, administrators, high-level senior executives brushed her off. And she wrote a paper about that called NASA Revisited. But she was a nice lady. She wasn't like Charlie Camarda that raises hell. She's very respectful. She doesn't go crazy. But she tried her hardest to get NASA to change their culture, and they didn't listen to her.
So before I get deeper into your book, before we get in there, I just want to, no, I guess because people are going to want to know. I
talk too much, John.
No. I just want to get one more thing out about it, because we didn't actually talk about your flight.
Oh, okay. We still didn't get there.
We didn't get there.
We just talked about Columbia.
We talked about Columbia, and we jumped a little bit ahead to the book, which we're going to do that anyway. But I'll make one more observation about these bureaucracies, because I think, like Charlie's going to be tomorrow night. We're doing our Terraverse Salon. I've got almost 200 people coming to this. It's Charlie.
Please ask tough questions.
No, it'll be fine. But it's going to be a room full of people, and a lot of them in there are from the government and law enforcement, and they face the same issues.
It's exactly
and they're
the same.
frustrated. They're such good people. They love their jobs, but they are not allowed to do it very often.
Yeah.
It's tragic.
Yeah.
I think that's where, depends on where your politics are. I'm hoping, when Trump says he's going to break up some of these, I'm saying, please do that, because that's what needs to be done. We need systemic change to these bureaucracies.
He's got to. I hope the next administrator, Jarek Isaacman, is listening, because he's got a tough job ahead of him. And if we tie his hands behind his back like my hands were tied, it's not going to happen. And it's not only we lose NASA, we lose technical capability, we lose these technologies, these disciplines. That's the United States of America.
And you know this, and I know this, and everyone should know this. The reason why it's hard to reform these is because they don't have competition. You're in the private sector, which I learned. If you keep getting fat, dumb, and happy, somebody's going to take that.
You're absolutely right. Look what's happening in the aerospace industry. We had 12, 15 different companies in the aerospace industry during Apollo. We ended up with 2 or 3. They swallowed each other up. Now you're seeing it break apart again. And the dinosaurs that are having the issues are those big bureaucracies. And hopefully these other new companies won't go the same way.
Well, they will at some point, but then somebody should disrupt them.
But you're seeing the innovation. You're seeing the innovation.
And that's why you need that competition. That's why capitalism works, in the sense you got to give people the ability to say, I could do it better, I could do it cheaper, and I'm going to do it. And if I do, you're gone. And we don't. The government doesn't have it. No, the government is just—it's a cost plus. Give me another 10% this year, another 10% next year. You have no accountability.
No.
You can fail and fail and fail, and you can still get more money. The post office can lose billions of dollars a year,
cost plus fixed
and
fee.
They're still out there. Why?
Cost plus fixed fee.
Yeah, only because it's the direct marketing that gets the subsidies for 6 cents of.
I think these other new entrepreneurs, they understand the business side.
I love it. The young kids they're going to get it done.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about that mission. So it was like 2 years. How long it was they were trying to solve it?
It's 2.5 years before we flew again after Columbia, almost exactly the same time that it took after Challenger, right? And so I didn't know I was going to be assigned on the flight. I came back from Russia. I started working on these teams. 2 teams I worked on were the impact team and the repair team. I wanted to make sure that the next people that flew, they had a way to fix that wing, to fix that damage. And so the call came, when I was working in Don Pettit's garage. My buddy's up there now, 69 years old. We invented like things that I got to fly on the first flight after the accident, if God forbid we had a problem. And you talk about, making these decisions. Why did I do that? And why am I saying don't fly the astronauts now? Right? Because when you're an astronaut, that's your job. And we know the odds are 1 in 67 that could happen, just like when you're a soldier. You go out there because that's your job. And that's what we do, and we accept that risk. But when now, the next flight after me, when I'm director of engineering, and I'm looking at my friends that are going to be getting on the next vehicle, I say, no. I stand up and say, no, we don't need to fly. We don't need to fly because we can fix this very simply, and they don't have to accept that risk.
So when you went up, were you involved in that 2.5-year period to do the analysis, or did you just come in?
No, yeah, we were building things in Don Pettit's garage. We were solving problems that large organizations weren't able to solve. We designed a patch that could survive entry heating while they were still struggling. But I still didn't have the technical capability to do that. We were looking at it in the first part of the design phase, what I call conceptual design, looking at a low-level rigor. And then we handed it off to Steve Scotty and a bunch of engineers back at Langley that were researchers and solved the problem very quickly. If we would have handed it off back to the shuttle program, they still wouldn't have been able to solve it.
Now, when you went up, what was your level of confidence that you think that the situation was resolved?
Oh, well, let's put it this way. We knew that the foam was always going to be a problem, right? So when we were at Michoud looking at the cryogenic tank, the ET, the external tank, me and our crew members said, why don't you take off this other large piece of foam? And the JSC, the shuttle program, did their analysis, and they said there's a 1 in 10,000 chance that that's not going to come off. Don't worry about it. But I knew they didn't know what they were talking about, right? So we had other pieces of foam that would have been a problem. But their other backup position was, well, if it comes off and it damages your vehicle and you can't come back, you're going to shelter on space station. This was the backup plan. You're going to shelter on space station, and we're going to get a space shuttle on the pad and ready in 30 days to rescue you in time. And we all know how long it takes to do that. But they said they could do that, and that's the backup plan. You know what? When we launched, you know what happened? That large piece of foam from that power ramp came off. Well, you saw it.
No, I saw that.
You saw it in the movie.
Everybody was like,
You saw it in the movie.
Like, oh,
That's
my God.
right.
Deja vu, right?
Almost hit our wing. And then what they
I guess you got
didn't
lucky
say-
where it didn't hit the wing, right?
we got lucky by the grace of God. It didn't hit the wing. But then what you didn't see in the movie was that instant, the program manager leading the shuttle program said all the shuttles are grounded. So our family watching TV said, what happened? Thinking to themselves, what happened to that rescue vehicle? Because we hadn't inspected the vehicle to see if there was damage, but the space shuttle was grounded. So that was really not a real
While
backup
you were up
plan.
there, they grounded them.
They grounded it, yeah. So if we would have had damage, what would they have done? I know every one of my astronaut friends and colleagues, they would have been jumping up and down to jump on the next vehicle. But the program had to make a decision. If the problem is still there, are we going to risk another crew?
Another crew.
But you know this in the military, you do that.
Hell yeah, we
You do
would.
that. You do that.
You'd have plenty of volunteers,
And
right?
absolutely. I know if they would
There's
have
no
polled
way
the
to leave you up
astronaut
there.
office, they would have been jumping up and down.
They would have fired that baby up the same day.
That's right.
So, talk about two things. I mean, I think that's enough that we get into your book. But
No, we don't have to jump into
no,
the
no,
book.
no,
You
no.
just go.
The maneuver that Eileen did when she flipped it over.
That was beautiful.
Tell me that, and then I want to talk
That
about how
was
you figured out
beautiful.
those little spacers and how you came up with the solution for that.
yeah.
So I think those
So-
are the two most important pieces on the back end.
So
of this.
what people saw in that movie, and this is the flight controllers on the ground developed this procedure, or Eileen asked them to, and they didn't think they wanted to do it. Eileen said, well, she basically flew our vehicle in space 600 feet below the International Space Station and then did a backflip. Take your eyes off of the vehicle, like pilots don't typically want to do that, rotate it 360 degrees so that the people on space station would basically be photographing with telephoto lenses and videotaping to inspect to see if any damage on the vehicle. That was when we had lots of these new procedures that we were testing for the first time. And when they did that, and they did the image processing on the ground, they saw two little pieces of felt material sticking out from the belly of the vehicle near the nose and in the upper part of the region there. And the people on the ground, the real good researchers at Langley, the aerothermodynamics people, did their analyses. And they said, if we don't remove those pieces, pull them out, you're going to trip the boundary layer when you enter the Earth's atmosphere, and the vehicle's going to burn up. The leading edges are going to burn up, and the vehicle's going to get too hot. And the people on the ground had to decide, shouldn't we do this? Do we have to do this? Because doing an unscripted spacewalk, putting two people out there is dangerous. It's a little bit dangerous, but we're pretty good at it. And so two friends of Charlie on the ground, Scott Berry and Tom Horvath, did the analysis, sent it up to us in a report that we got on orbit. And Eileen said, take a look at this, Charlie, because I didn't think we needed to do this, right? I read the report, and I knew the people, and I knew the rigor, and I knew they had the know-who with the know-how. I knew these people, how they were trained, how they were mentored. And I looked at that analysis, and I said, Eileen, we have to do this. I think we have to do this emergency spacewalk. And that's what we relayed back to our boss, the head of the astronaut office, because we didn't trust the ground, right?
At that point, yeah.
We didn't trust the ground. So we didn't trust the flight controllers, and we weren't sure the engineers were in a safe enough environment that they would be willing to speak up. So that's why I carried the Friends of Charlie in my crew notebook, and I called these people up from space directly to talk to them, not going through mission control. But every night before we went to bed at night, we got to talk to the head of the astronaut office, and the flight directors were not allowed on the loop. No one else was allowed on the loop. We didn't want them to hear what we were saying. We wanted to get it straight from our boss, what was going on, because that's who we trusted. And not too many people realize that, but we launched with a crew that had very little faith in only a few people. I had only faith in a select few people on the ground.
Well, you guys were going up to save the program, effectively, right? They were going to shut it down, right?
Well, think of what happens. If that piece of foam hits us and we have two failures in a row, we lose the program, right? But then after that, I become director of engineering. And now I have to make the decision on the next mission. And there are other pieces of foam that I try to tell my center director as director of engineering, I'm trying to change the culture. I want my people to speak to me, tell me if I say something wrong, have a safe environment. We tell our center director, hey, we're not ready to fly. We think we need to take these other pieces of foam off. We're at the flight readiness review for the next mission. And he stands up when they poll the people that are signing the certificate of flight readiness. He stands up and said, Johnson Space Flight Center's go for launch. I had to stand up, come to the microphone, and say, I'm Charlie Camarda, the head of engineering. We're not ready to fly. And then the chief engineer said we weren't ready to fly. And the head of safety and mission assurance said we weren't ready to fly. And I got reassigned 3 days after that. So you tell me if the culture changed.
No. So by the way, just to fill in our viewers, so Charlie's team went out, they did a spacewalk, they took care of those little felt things.
That's right.
They landed that baby like a best they ever did, right?
Eileen did. She landed it at Edwards Air Force Base.
And it was
because
amazing.
We couldn't land at the Cape. The weather wasn't good for 3 days in a row. So we ended up landing at Edwards Air Force Base. We really wanted to come back to the Cape to really thank those people that work so hard. These people are generations of people doing the right thing at Kennedy Space Center, making sure that we fly safe. And they worked hard. They worked very hard. And we really wanted to be there for them.
So Charlie, you just reminded me, when they landed in California, they would bring the shuttle back and land at Dyess Air Force Base, where I was stationed. We had a big enough runway. There was only a few runways that military could land at.
Yeah.
And then they would refuel, and then they would fly.
So you were there when it was on top of the
yes,
carrier, on top of the carrier aircraft.
Yes.
Oh man, on top of a 747.
Yes.
Isn't that amazing? Watching that thing flying around the skyline.
It was a big deal every time we came in because they would land at our base. That was like the midway stop between California
crazy.
and Florida. And I remember
Fitzhugh Fulton was the pilot,
yeah?
and his brother taught me dynamics, I think, at Langley. He was one of the Langley researchers that taught classes out there.
That was a big deal, man. Everybody used to
Untold.
come out to see it. Because we're in the middle of nowhere in Texas, but that was a big deal for us.
Oh yeah.
So let's get into and by the way, for people, we got another. We got some more time. But I want to talk about the book a little bit. And then for the viewers, this is not the last you'll hear of Charlie. If you watch on our podcast, that's either might be live tomorrow or might be slightly thereafter because we got a lot of technical issues to deal with tomorrow. Charlie's going to be speaking completely about his book. He's got a whole hour to talk and Q&A. So if you're interested in what you're hearing today, which I can't imagine you're not, you're going to want to hear more about it. And we're going to now get into this book. So here's the book for our viewers. Okay. I hope Jen can see that. Is that good? It's a little flashy? Okay. So it's called Mission Out of Control. It's on Headline Books. You can get it on Amazon. It's available, and it's available today. It just came out last month, right, Charlie?
Yeah. And if you go to missionoutofcontrolbook.com, you can get an autographed copy.
Oh, there you go, an autographed copy. If you're in New York, you could come by tomorrow night and not only get an autographed copy, but you can get Charlie to sign it for you.
Just sign 200 of them.
Just sign 200 for our guests tomorrow. So this book, its tagline is an astronaut's odyssey to fix high-risk organizations and prevent tragedy. Because this is what you did and learned, and now you want to take this outside. So talk to me a little bit about the thesis of the book, and then get into some of your conclusions and some of the reasons what we got to do here.
John, this took me 18 years to write because for a couple of different reasons. I think everything I went through with NASA and after return to flight in the first half of this book, I don't know if I was suffering from PTSD from the abuse, and every time I would drag out the notes and have to think it, my whole personality would change. But it really took me that long to understand and research and understand the true cause of the problem, which was the culture. And so I spend a lot of time in the first couple of chapters talking about how NASA lost that research culture, and then what sociology, behavioral science, what is culture, and what defines, and because it's not just one culture in an organization, there's thousands of subcultures, there's hundreds of subcultures. So NASA and Boeing, you have each research center is a different culture. Then in there you have many different subcultures. And so I talk about that and the different types of cultures at NASA Langley Research Center, at Glenn, at these other NASA centers, and at Johnson Space Flight Center. The astronaut office has a different culture. The rules that we govern how we work and how we behave and how we communicate, totally different. You don't go out of the chain of command. It's much like the military. I wasn't used to this. I came from a free environment, a very psychologically safe environment, no layers of management, or there were management there, but it was very informal. And so you can go around the chain of command. You could disagree with your boss. You could argue with your boss. It wasn't a big deal. This was a totally different culture for me. It was much more like a military culture. And so I described those differences, which explains how people behave. This is why people like Diane Vaughan could predict that there's going to be another failure, could see that the culture didn't change. The engineers were oblivious to this. So I go through that. And then the chapters 3 and 4, I discuss, this is the odyssey I went through when I was trying to change the culture and try to highlight these major issues that could cost astronauts their lives. Chapter 4, I describe a detailed anomaly with my wing when I flew back from space that people were covering up at NASA. And I take them through this journey. And I have all the emails and it was almost like I did my own accident investigation because I wanted to preserve that to show this is how people were talking to me. This is how people were preventing me from getting the information I needed to prove to them that we could lose another shuttle. And they kept flying 8 missions. And it goes through that and my struggles. But I don't want to say like this is sour grapes because I didn't quit NASA. After I was reassigned, I didn't quit because I wanted to change NASA. I wanted NASA to be great again. Damn it, I worked for NASA longer than any other astronaut and an awful lot of people out there. I worked there for 45 years. I wasn't going to go away quietly. And so I put my head down. I started digging into this. And I started looking at, well, this is what we could do to change this culture. And so the second half of the book talks about how we use technology to monitor these weak signals of dysfunctional behavior or technical dysfunction, so that what appear to be weak signals to most people, if you're trained as a sociologist or a psychologist, these are strong signals that there's a problem. And so I could see the weak signals as the technical signals very strongly and very clearly, but being trained and learning how these people that are amazing people, the Amy Edmondses, Diane Vaughns of the world that were trying to tell NASA they had a problem, I began to see how important it was. And so the last couple of chapters, I talk about how me and this other team of experts I was working with outside of NASA, we were using technology to monitor students on design teams. Me and Mike Ritchie, Jana Hitela from Finland, amazing, working with kids in Finland for 6 years, and Peter Morales and people like Frank Ciccio that were looking at workforce development in New York. We developed this technology and we were able to psych out and see behaviors in students that were designing aircraft. And basically there was a 2-year course called Boeing Aeropace program, where they had students from 10 different universities spread around the country, working like real engineers virtually and sometimes meeting a couple of times during the year, going through the process of designing and building an airplane, autonomous airplane to fly. And then they go out to South Carolina, they take these aircraft out there and they fly them. And they judge how they did as a team. And we monitor them. But what we did was we collected all that information, all that digital information, all those traces, and we could watch how they interacted with each other, how they communicated with each other, how they communicated with technical experts, and dug into the data. And we were able to predict how they would perform. And so that was very crude things that we were doing way back when. With the tools we have now, because you can't have a Charlie Camarda or a Diane Vaughn in every one of these hundreds of teams. And it only takes one of that team for a Boeing or a NASA to have major tragedies. But we can train artificial intelligence to scrape this data and alert us when they see these signals. And I really believe that's going to be a transformational use of AI, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. And I think that's something that could be put to good use, because the people at NASA right now, those program managers that were on the dais saying the heat shield is fine, and we had an executive council that say it was fine, I see all the dysfunction. I saw immediately that was going to be a problem when they were hiding information of how bad the Orion heat shield was for months. But the minute I saw in the press, I could tell from the words they were using in the press that they were hiding something. And then I found out they were. And I forced NASA to come clean. The Office of Inspector General showed the photographs of how bad it was. And then they had to start putting together these teams to solve this problem. The problem is they put together the same teams in the same ways that they tried to solve these other problems, and they were just as corrupt and just as dysfunctional. They were hiding information from the key people. They were keeping it secret, and they're doing all these bad behaviors. And so I'm calling them out on them. And that's why I'm going live and having these 2-hour interviews, wanting these managers to come in. It's Charlie Camarda against a whole slew of all these technical people that are building this story, this supposed flight rationale to convince people that we're safe to fly so you can put astronauts on there. And I'm saying, bring it on, and I'll shoot holes in everything you throw at me without the benefit of even having that data.
Right. So, Charlie.
But other than that, I'm
you're not.
Person.
No, and I don't want you to be calm because this is important. Could you take, now you said you can use AI, you can pick up on the signaling better, you can follow data.
Absolutely.
Let's take an example. I'm running a large organization. We have a pretty dangerous mission, maybe it's infrastructure, maybe it's oil, maybe I'm an aircraft, whatever. And I think this should apply to everyone. I suspect that you think it could apply to any organization.
Absolutely, it should.
Now, what is the practical methods of once you get the information, how do you then retrain and reorganize the company? Is there a?
This is, you know,
This could be a 2-day thing, but let's give us,
this
you know,
could be-
because we're
this
going to
could
wrap
be
it
a-
up. But at least
could be
give.
a long- this could be a
let's
long
tease
discussion.
people with that because we'll have another discussion on
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Okay,
That's a big
Let's tease
discussion. I
them.
want to have that for the second 2-hour discussion
Yeah.
online, and I would love to have that discussion.
Okay, all right. So this is it. You're going to have to come back to hear that because today it's we just teased you. Charlie has identified the problem. He's got a solution. We're not going to tell you today. You got to come back.
Well, you could read the
Go read the book.
The
You get
second
ahead
half
of
of
it.
the book talks about it, but it's the purpose of that second half is to get people to start talking about
Yeah.
it,
No,
to discussing it.
I want this to become, and it should become part of your managerial skill set for any company that's running a business.
I tried to help Boeing. And a matter of fact, I gave the presentation of how bad the culture was at NASA to Boeing executives, and you could see their eyes; they were wide. And some of them came up to me afterwards, and they said, "You know, Charlie, the culture's worse at Boeing." And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it because the people I knew at Boeing were great. 6 months later was the first Lion Air crash.
Yeah.
6 months later. And what I tell those managers at Boeing, the people above them, I said, you know, your people knew there was a problem. You didn't listen to them. Everyone that was good, and we have these good people at NASA, but the culture is so toxic and people are so afraid to speak up that you have to listen to those good people. And if you don't have their trust and you don't protect their back, like John Young, they won't speak to you.
Yeah, so Charlie, I'm going to wrap this up with a couple of thoughts. And by the way, send comments. Charlie will respond. Come back for stage 2. We'll really get into this because one of the things I noticed throughout my career, and one of the biggest reasons for my success, is I stayed outside of the culture. I built teams within a team with my value set and my approaches, and then we executed almost outside of the approvals of these big organizations because they would throttle us. And we became so successful.
But that's the environment you created
for
your team.
Because I knew better.
That's right.
Okay, I've been in big organizations. I was in the military. This
goes across any industry, and it's a lot of how we learned it in the streets,
Yeah.
John. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you knew who to trust. You knew who your friends were. You knew who
And
had your back.
you wanted to pick the good teams too, right? You wanted to get picked on the good teams.
Did you ever read a book by Stanley McChrystal called Team of Teams? You got to get that book. Stanley McChrystal talks about Team of Teams and how they had to transform the way they fought Al-Qaeda in Iraq, right? And it's a great book. But when I read that book, that's when the light bulb went on, and I drew the analogy of how me and my team solved problems when we were researchers.
But you got to be rogue, Charlie. You got to go rogue almost.
You got to go rogue. But then think about it. So he did a great job fighting in Al-Qaeda. How come it didn't spread through the entire DOD? That's what you have to do to change the bureaucracy. That has to be, you have to figure out how to diffuse that through the whole ecosystem.
Well, we got to change the narrative. So while all these companies are spending tons of money on DEI and getting nowhere, right? No, I'm not saying that. I don't want to picking on DEI. I'm just saying it wasn't so hard to get all this money and all this training for something that's useless when for less money and for better outcomes, we could do Charlie's methods. So that's what we're going to talk about next time.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about politics next time.
No, we don't need to get into politics. But look, we're not about politics. What we're about, Charlie, you and me, and a lot of our people that we work with, we're about excellence. We're about success. We're about getting things done, and we're about.
And you give credit to the people that are doing the work.
You don't make it to you are where I am without a great team of people and that you trained. I have so many partners out there in the world that I trained and I made partner because they are just great people. And my legacy, and I know this is your legacy, was always about how many people could I get to become better than me.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. If you're the boss,
right.
You want people that are better than you. You want them to be better than you.
Pushed them.
And you want them to tell you when you do something wrong and to correct you.
I tell them, I'm the old man. I want you to push me out. It's time, right? I want to get kicked out. I said, I want you to replace me, and I am begging you to. I'm not holding you back because I want to keep my position.
And you want to know something? That's why I love working with Debbie Heiser and the Mentorship Project. I'd love to introduce you to her because that's the satisfaction you get back. Working with these young people, making a difference. I mean, you get it immediately.
Yeah, I'm gonna wrap it up here. But I found I don't know where my son found it. He found a file on his drive that I was gonna download it. I mean, clean it up so you could use it for the thing. And on this file was I had a party, and I think it was like almost 15, 16 years ago at my house, and my crew decided to do something interesting for me. So they went around and they interviewed everybody before the party, right there, and they were saying things about me. And I started listening. I said, "Holy shit, what a life!" These people were affected by it.
Yeah.
They learned something,
Yeah.
and the things that they said, I get teared up just hearing
That's
it.
what it's all about.
And I had looked at that thing.
That's what it's all about.
Yep. So Charlie's one of the greatest guys in the world. He's my new best friend. We're going to hang out
You're
together.
an FOC, friend of Charlie, friend of John.
You want to know this man. You want to read this book. You want to watch the Terraverse Salon that he's doing tomorrow night. You're going to want to watch part 2. And then Charlie and I are going to bring in some other people, and we're going to broaden this conversation to some other areas with some of the good people that you know. Okay?
Let's do it.
Because this is what this is all about. It's about teaching people, giving people hope. And Charlie, I don't know about you. I'm always optimistic. I think people are unbelievably resilient.
It sounds like I'm pessimistic and I'm bashing NASA, but I'm doing it because I know we can be better.
Yeah, and I have so much hope and faith, even though a lot of people are bashing the younger generation, so you want to pick on, they'll get there.
Yeah.
And I think maybe we didn't do a good job of the mentoring when we were there. We probably should have done it better. We got good mentoring. I don't know. Maybe we got distracted. We don't,
And the young
think
people.
of the universities where they're doing.
I'm
They don't do
inspired
it.
by
Yeah.
the young people.
Me too.
I really am.
Me too. So, okay, we're going to wrap it up. Jenna, sorry you didn't get to participate today. We'll get you on the next one. But Jenna did all the hard work in the background. She's doing a
She
million.
didn't jump in once.
No, but she's doing a million things for this thing tomorrow night, Charlie. So, I mean, it is a big event. It's our biggest event ever because of you. We've never had more than like 70 or 80. We almost tripled the crowd for you.
Oh my God!
So you better bring your A game, brother.
Oh my God! Now I'm nervous. Now I gotta go back. I have to go back to my hotel room and
get
that pitch ready.
Here's the guy who went up on the shuttle. He gets nervous. Okay, good luck to you. Okay, subscribe, like, comment, hit the bell. Buy Charlie's book, by the way, huh? It's a good book. You gotta want to get this book.
No, I'm not doing this for money.
It's not the money.
Don't buy the book unless you're really serious about changing an organization.
Oh, if you can't afford the book, let me know in the comments and I'll send you one because this is not. You're right. It's not about the money, Charlie. This is about helping people. So and it's
about getting a message that maybe this could work. Maybe.
I hope so. So we're going to sign off. Thanks a lot, Jen. You can wrap it up. See you later in the next Terraverse Salon or next Terraverse TV program. Thank you so much, Charlie, for being here. My brother, I love you. All right.